In the autumn of 1942, somewhere in Nazi-occupied France, the Gestapo chief of Lyon received orders from Berlin. They were looking for a spy, not a German spy, not a British officer, not even a man. They were hunting a woman, an American woman. And this woman had cost them more prisoners of war, more sabotaged supply lines, and more lost intelligence than almost anyone else operating behind German lines. The Nazis called her La Dame qui boite, the lady who limps. Her actual name was Virginia Hall, and she was 36 years old when the Germans put her on their most wanted list. The head of the Gestapo in Lyon, a man named Klaus Barbie, later infamous as the Butcher of Lyon, reportedly said he would give anything to get his hands on her. What the Germans didn't know was that the limping lady they were hunting wasn't just any woman. She was a woman with a wooden leg, a woman who had been rejected by her own government, a woman who had been told she could never serve her country, and a woman who decided that if nobody would let her fight, she would do it anyway, and she would become the most dangerous Allied operative in France. This is her story.
Virginia Hall was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1906 into a world of privilege that seemed designed to crush ambition. Her family was wealthy, conservative, they had expectations. A girl like Virginia was supposed to finish school, marry well, and disappear into a comfortable life of country clubs and garden parties. But Virginia had other ideas. From childhood, she loved adventure. She rode horses recklessly across her family's land. She hunted with rifles and shotguns. She played pirates in school plays while other girls played house. Her parents looked at their daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. She was brilliant, charismatic, clever, but she was also the kind of person who wanted more from life than Baltimore society was willing to offer. After high school, Virginia attended Radcliffe and Barnard colleges. She studied politics and economics. She read voraciously. She dreamed, and gradually, a vision took shape in her mind. She would join the Foreign Service. She would become a diplomat. She would travel the world representing her country. It was the 1920s. Women in America had just won the right to vote. For a moment, it seemed like anything was possible. Virginia went to Paris. She was 20 years old. She fell in love, not with a person, but with a place. Paris in the 1920s was electric. Jazz clubs, intellectual salons, freedom, liberty. Women could smoke cigarettes in public, and nobody seemed shocked. Women could speak their minds. Women could dream. Paris changed her. It showed her what she could be if the world would let her. And when she returned to America, determined to make those dreams real, she began knocking on doors. The doors didn't open. Not the diplomatic doors anyway. In 1935, Virginia applied for the U.S. Foreign Service. She was told no. Too few women were hired anyway. She applied again. No. And again. No. The State Department had rules, unwritten rules, rules that said the kind of work diplomats did was not suitable for women. But Virginia was resourceful. If she couldn't get in through the front door, she would find another way. She took a clerical job at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. It was a humble work, but it was a start. She was inside. She was working for her country. She was abroad, living the life she dreamed of. From Poland, she transferred to Turkey, then to Venice, then to Estonia. Each posting took her further into the world. Each posting gave her new languages. She became fluent in French and German. Each posting taught her how intelligence services worked, how diplomacy worked, how the world worked. She was getting closer to her dream, close enough to see it, close enough to almost touch it.
And then, on December 1933, while bird hunting with American friends in Smyrna, Turkey, Virginia stumbled climbing over a wire fence. Her 12-gauge shotgun discharged into her left foot. The wound was catastrophic. The pellets had mangled the foot beyond repair. Infection set in. Gangrene. The doctors had no choice. In the hospital in Smyrna, Turkey, they amputated her left leg below the knee. Virginia Hall was 27 years old, and they were cutting away her dream with her foot.
She spent the summer of 1933 on her family's farm in Maryland learning to walk again. They gave her a 7-pound wooden prosthetic leg. It was crude by modern standards, heavy, uncomfortable. It dug into her stump if she walked too far. It caught on obstacles. It made every step deliberate, every movement measured. But Virginia named it Cuthbert, after Saint Cuthbert, an Anglo-Saxon miracle worker from 7th century England. Why? Probably because she needed a miracle. By November 1933, she was back at work, back at the consulate in Venice, back trying to prove that one missing leg wouldn't stop her from becoming a diplomat. In 1937, Virginia applied to the Foreign Service again. She was educated, she was experienced, she spoke multiple languages. She had proven herself competent and reliable. Surely now. The State Department wrote back. They had rules against hiring people with disabilities, rules that said a person missing a leg was unfit for diplomatic service. They didn't apologize, they didn't explain themselves, they simply said no. Virginia tried again, another application, another rejection. The dream that had sustained her since childhood, the dream that had brought her across the Atlantic, the dream that had kept her going through the amputation and the rehabilitation, that dream was officially dead. The State Department had murdered it. She should have given up. Most people would have. Most people would have accepted a quiet life, a desk job, a resignation to the limits the world had placed on her. Virginia Hall was not most people.
In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War began. For months, America remained neutral. But Virginia could see what was coming. She could see the darkness gathering across Europe. In 1940, when France seemed on the verge of collapse, Virginia didn't sit in an office. She volunteered as an ambulance driver for the French army. She was driving ambulances on the front lines while German tanks advanced, pulling wounded men out of the fire while shells exploded around her. When France fell in June 1940, Virginia had to run. Everyone was running. The Germans were overrunning the country. The Vichy government was collaborating with the Nazis. Refugees were flooding across the borders. Virginia made her way to Spain, where, by pure chance, she met a British intelligence officer named George Bellows. He recognized something in her: intelligence, courage, a hunger for something beyond safety. He gave her a phone number. He told her if she made it to London to call that number and mention his name. He said the people who answered might be interested in someone like her. Virginia made it to London, and she called the number. The man who answered was Nicholas Boddington, an officer in a brand new organization called the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Churchill had created SOE with a simple mission: to set Europe ablaze, to conduct sabotage, espionage, and subversion against the Nazis from behind enemy lines. The SOE was looking for operatives, brave people, clever people, people willing to operate alone in occupied territory with no backup and almost no chance of survival if they were caught. Early 1941. Virginia Hall recruited by the Special Operations Executive.
Boddington asked Virginia if she was interested. Virginia said yes before he could change his mind. But there was a problem. The SOE wanted to send her into Nazi-occupied France, and Virginia had a wooden leg. Colleagues at the SOE had doubts. How could she operate in the field with a prosthetic? How could she run if the Gestapo was chasing her? How could she climb? How could she move fast enough to survive? Virginia's response was simple: "It won't stop me." The SOE put her through training, weapons training, communications training, how to use a radio transmitter, how to encode messages, how to operate in secret, how to survive torture. They even put her through realistic simulations with water torture to test her resolve. She passed every test, every single one. In August 1941, they gave her forged papers. They identified her as Marguerite Chuen, a journalist working for the New York Post. They gave her a code name, Germaine. They gave her a mission: go into unoccupied Vichy France and organize a resistance network, report on German troop movements, recruit agents, build a spy ring that can operate when the time comes for the Allies to strike back. And they expected her to be caught within a few days. Virginia Hall stepped off a bus in Lyon, France on September 8, 1941. She was 35 years old, walking with a pronounced limp, carrying a wooden leg, and about to become the most dangerous Allied operative in occupied Europe.
Virginia started in Lyon because Lyon was the heart of the French resistance. It was also the headquarters of the Gestapo in south-central France. It was about as dangerous a place as she could possibly have chosen, which is exactly why she chose it. She rented a small apartment. She lived alone. She told people she was a journalist recovering from an old hunting accident, which was true. She moved through Lyon carefully, meeting with contacts, identifying safe houses, recruiting French men and women who hated the Nazi occupation and were willing to risk their lives to fight it. She stayed at a convent and befriended the nuns there. She befriended the owner of a brothel because brothel owners know everything. German soldiers talk to women, and women in brothels talk to other women, and intelligence flows. Virginia developed a web of connections across Lyon. Each person knew their part. Most of them never knew they were working for an American. By early 1942, Virginia had built a network of agents across the entire region. She had safe houses where she could hide people. She had contacts in the French resistance. She had people inside the French police department who could give her intelligence about German movements. And she had a radio. The radio was everything. The radio was how she sent intelligence back to London. The radio was how she received orders. The radio was also how she would get caught. Operating a radio transmitter in occupied France was one of the most dangerous things a spy could do. The Germans had direction-finding equipment. They could triangulate a radio signal. They could track it to its source. Virginia knew the risks. She did it anyway. She would hide the radio in safe houses across Lyon, moving it constantly so the Germans couldn't pin her down. She would tap out messages in code, reporting on German unit movements, on supply lines, on fortifications, on anything that could help the Allies plan the eventual invasion. But her work went beyond intelligence. In July 1942, French prisoners of war escaped from the prison camp at Mouzak. The Gestapo was furious. They knew who had helped them escape. They knew it was connected to the resistance network in Lyon. They didn't know it was Virginia. Virginia had helped mastermind the escape. She had acquired safe houses. She had arranged transport. She had organized the smuggling route to Spain that would get these men back to England, where some of them would be retrained and sent back to France as resistance leaders. The escape worked. The prisoners made it to Spain and then back to England. Later, several of them would return to France and become key leaders in the resistance. The Germans were apoplectic with rage. They didn't know it was a woman. They didn't know it was a limping American with a wooden leg. They just knew that someone in Lyon had defeated them. Someone had humiliated them. And that someone had to die. The Gestapo flooded Lyon with 500 additional agents. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, sent their own operatives. Every hotel, every cafe, every train station became a potential ambush. The Germans put up wanted posters. The drawings weren't accurate. They didn't know what the limping lady looked like, but the message was clear. The enemy's most dangerous spy. We must find and destroy her. Klaus Barbie, the chief of the Gestapo in Lyon, became obsessed with catching her. He reportedly told his men, "I would give anything to get my hands on that limping Canadian." Virginia wasn't Canadian, but she was still alive, and that was the important part. She was also still working. Even as the Gestapo closed in, Virginia continued recruiting agents. She continued sending radio messages. She continued helping downed Allied pilots escape. She was invisible in plain sight, a woman hobbling through Lyon on a wooden leg, speaking with an American accent but claiming to be a journalist. Nobody suspected her. Nobody thought a woman, especially not a disabled woman, could be running a resistance network. But by November 1942, Virginia could feel the net tightening. Her police contacts who had been protecting her were under too much pressure from the Germans. They couldn't shield her anymore. The Gestapo was closing in. Arrests were happening. Network members were disappearing. Virginia knew it was time to run. In November 1942, Virginia Hall made a decision that would define her legend. She decided not to run to a safer location. She decided to cross the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain on foot, in winter, with a wooden leg. The Pyrenees are brutal, even in good conditions. They're steep, they're high, they're exposed. A 7,500-foot pass through snow and ice and wind. And Virginia decided to walk it. She traveled by train to Perpignan. From there, local guides led her into the mountains. She walked for 3 days, 50 miles across the Pyrenees, sometimes in heavy snow, sometimes in numbing cold. Cuthbert, her wooden leg, dug into her stump with every step. By the end of the journey, her stump was a bloody mess. She later joked to her SOE handlers that she hoped Cuthbert wouldn't prove bothersome. The handlers didn't understand. They just radioed back, "If Cuthbert troublesome, eliminate him." They didn't realize Cuthbert was her leg. But Virginia didn't eliminate Cuthbert. She dragged him through the snow, over the pass, down the other side, and into Spain. A marathon runner would later retrace part of her route and found it exhausting even with 2 working legs. Virginia did it with 1. When she reached Spain, the Spanish authorities arrested her. She had crossed the border illegally. She was a foreign national. She was a spy. But the U.S. Embassy eventually secured her release, and she made her way back to London. She had been SOE's longest surviving agent in France, 14 months operating behind enemy lines. She was legendary within the organization. Maurice Buckmaster, the head of F section at SOE, knew her capabilities. He also knew something else. When Virginia asked to go back to France, Buckmaster refused. He told her she was too well known. The Gestapo was still hunting her. Sending her back would be a suicide mission. The answer was no. But Virginia didn't accept no. If the British wouldn't send her back, she would find someone who would. The Americans had their own intelligence service now, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. They were ramping up operations in France ahead of the planned D-Day invasion. In March 1944, Virginia Hall joined the OSS under a new code name, Diane. Her handlers in the OSS were wary of putting a woman in charge of operations. The patriarchal attitudes of the 1940s military were still firmly in place, so they made her a deputy, but they sent her back to France. This time, she would be going in disguise. The Germans had her description. She was too well known in Lyon. So Virginia worked with makeup artists and even a London dentist. The dentist ground down her white American teeth. Makeup artists taught her how to draw wrinkles on her face. They gave her the look of a middle-aged French milkmaid. When she parachuted back into France in March 1944, nobody recognized her. She was no longer the limping lady. She was an old woman, harmless, invisible. But her work was now on an entirely different scale. The D-Day invasion was coming. The Allies needed to disrupt German supply lines, sabotage communications, and coordinate with French resistance forces when the invasion launched. Virginia's job was to organize more than 1,000 French resistance fighters and prepare them for coordinated action. Over the next 2 months before D-Day, Virginia and her network conducted sabotage missions across occupied France. They blew up bridges, they cut telephone lines, they ambushed German convoys, they killed German soldiers. Intelligence reports from the period credit her network with killing over 150 German soldiers and capturing more than 500 others. All of this coordinated by a woman with a wooden leg, working alone in occupied territory while the Gestapo was still hunting for the limping lady. When D-Day came on June 6, 1944, Virginia's network was ready. They launched coordinated sabotage attacks across their region. Railway lines were cut, German reinforcements were delayed, communications were disrupted. Resistance fighters fought alongside American soldiers. By some estimates, Virginia's network saved hundreds of American lives by disrupting German response to the invasion. After D-Day, Virginia's role changed. The Gestapo was in retreat. The Germans were losing. But Virginia kept working. She kept organizing. She kept fighting. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, Virginia Hall had spent nearly 4 years operating behind enemy lines. She had been the longest-serving female operative in the SOE. She had recruited hundreds of agents. She had organized thousands of resistance fighters. She had stolen Nazi secrets and sent them to London. She had helped Allied soldiers escape. She had killed Germans. She had changed the course of the war in her region. And almost nobody knew who she was. After the war, the world wanted to honor Virginia Hall. General William Donovan, the head of the OSS, recommended her for the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor in the U.S. military. She was the first civilian woman to receive it. But Virginia refused a public ceremony. She refused to give interviews. She refused to tell her story. When President Truman offered to present the medal to her in a public ceremony, she said no. She agreed only to a private ceremony with Donovan. Why? Because Virginia Hall had spent her entire war operating in secret. That was her nature. That was her strength. Fame was a liability in the intelligence world. Telling her story could endanger the people she had worked with. It could compromise ongoing operations. It could put her at risk. So she kept quiet. After the war, Virginia joined the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency. She became one of the agency's first operations officers. She worked for 21 years. She trained new agents. She ran operations. She was one of only a handful of senior women in the clandestine service. But she still told nobody about her war. Not even her family knew the full extent of what she had done. When relatives asked about her experiences, she would deflect. She would change the subject. She would smile and refuse to say anything more. In 1966, at the age of 60, she was forced to retire, mandatory retirement age for women in the CIA at that time. She moved back to Maryland. She bought a small house in Barnesville. She lived quietly. For 16 years, until her death in 1982, Virginia Hall lived in obscurity. The woman the Gestapo had called the most dangerous of all Allied spies. The woman who had escaped the Nazis. The woman who had returned to occupied France and led thousands of resistance fighters. the woman who had changed history. And hardly anyone knew.
Virginia Hall died on July 6, 1982, in Rockville, Maryland. She was 76 years old. Her obituary was short, unremarkable. American woman, spy for Britain and U.S. That was about all most people heard. But her story didn't die with her. It took decades, but slowly, historians and biographers began uncovering what Virginia Hall had really done during the war. Books were written, articles published. Her legacy was restored. In 2017, 3 books about Virginia Hall were published simultaneously. Historians were finally telling her story. The CIA put a painting in their headquarters showing Virginia sitting in a barn in occupied France, transmitting intelligence by radio. The painting is titled Les Marguerites fleuriront ce soir. The daisies will bloom tonight. The code phrase the BBC would broadcast to alert resistance networks that supply drops were coming. In 2020, a feature film was made about her life called A Call to Spy. Suddenly, people began to learn the story that should have been famous since 1945. But there's something important to understand about Virginia Hall's story. It's not just about espionage. It's not just about a woman breaking into a male-dominated field. It's about something more fundamental. Virginia Hall was told no. She was told her disability made her unfit to serve. She was told a woman couldn't be a spy. She was told that returning to occupied France would be suicide. She was told to accept limitations. She was told to stay safe. She was told to be quiet. And she listened to exactly none of it.
Virginia Hall never married. She never had children. She never became the diplomat she dreamed of becoming in her youth. In some ways, the life she wanted was never given to her. But the life she lived was infinitely larger. She became a legend, not because she wanted to be, not because she sought recognition, but because she refused to accept the world's limitations on who she could be. The Nazis called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, never caught her. She escaped, she returned, she fought again, she won. Cuthbert, her wooden leg, is now displayed at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. It sits behind glass as a reminder of the woman who walked 50 miles through the Pyrenees in winter with a leg made of wood. The woman who didn't let anything stop her. The woman who changed history while the world was looking somewhere else. Virginia Hall died in obscurity, but she lived in defiance. She was told she was disabled. She proved she was unstoppable. She was told she was a woman in a man's world. She proved she was smarter, braver, and more effective than most men. She was told to accept her limitations. Instead, she showed the world what happens when someone refuses to accept limits at all.
Her name was Virginia Hall. The Germans called her the Limping Lady. The SOE called her Germaine. The OSS called her Diane. But whoever she was, wherever she went, whatever name she used, she remained one thing: unstoppable. They called her disabled, until she became the Allies' most wanted operative.